I want to jump right into introducing our panelists. First, Marcie Merriman, Cultural Insights and Customer Strategy Leader at Ernst & Young, is an internationally recognized leader in brand strategy and cultural anthropology. Marcie has spent over 2 decades working with CEOs and their teams to anticipate disruption and propel growth through human-led strategies. She speaks globally on topics related to millennials, Gen Z, changing consumer behaviors, and corporate strategic response. Her work has been featured on CNBC, BBC, and Bloomberg TV, and in publications like the New York Times, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. Welcome, Marcie. And she is joined by Allison Medina, consumer and generational strategist at EY. Allison has spent the last 20 years focused on identifying and defining macro and micro trends in consumer, brand, and retail spaces. Allison previously served as Vice President of Content at Emerald X, as well as Editor-in-Chief of Design Retail Magazine, an award-winning trade publication serving the retail design industry. In her current role, she rigorously researches Gen Z and helps explain their impact as change agents driving societal shifts in current and future consumer behavior, the future of work, and the acceleration of digital transformation. Welcome, Allison. Take it away.
Thank you, Jen. Well, we're thrilled to be here with you today. And as Jen mentioned, I'm Marcie Merriman, and at EY, Allison and I work with boards, CEOs, and their teams to help them understand their customers as human beings. Looking at all facets of their lives, from how and where they shop to how they make decisions about things like work, money, and family. So we dig in to understand what they really want and to what retailers can do to give it to them. Having this perspective with this human lens on what's happening in our world has really never been more important. There's tons and tons of analysis out there right now about what's going on at retail. Supply chain issues, acceleration of digital, of e-commerce. There's also a lot of analysis around the consumer. But what's often missing from these discussions is the human element. There has been a shift in our values, our needs, beliefs, priorities as human beings. And this shift is changing cultures and it's changing societies. So understanding the drivers of these changes is critical to helping businesses move beyond this survival mode to get them ahead of the curve and to a place where they can thrive over the next decade. Allison?
I'm here. I'm having a hard time advancing my slide. There we go. Technology works, everyone. Don't worry. Hi, everyone. Allison Medina, so glad to be here. Thanks for having us, Jennifer. So today we're going to talk about what is driving these changes that Marcie just spoke about. What is coming next? Now, a lot of you might call that the future forces, right? Well, to us, the future is already happening now. We have to drivers of change that we're already seeing within the youth of America, and for that part, the world, really, to see the indicators and the influences that are happening already that will dramatically shift how we talk about retail in the coming years. Here's the problem that Marcie and I see. So many of the companies that we work with today come in talking about the youth of the world, and they're still talking about millennials. I think a lot of CEOs today would be shocked to discover that the oldest of the millennials actually turned 40 this year. We're thinking they're drivers of change. A lot of them are just driving minivans at this point. So we're really shifting our focus to the 14 to 24-year-olds, Gen Z, which are really going to start impacting how we speak about retail in the future. Understanding Gen Z is critical to retail CEOs, merchants, marketers, and strategists across all disciplines, not just retail. Our hope is that the information we will share with you today will help you be an enabler of these discussions moving forward.
So before we jump into examining Gen Z more closely, I think it's helpful to look at what a generation is and why Gen Z is so different. So a generation isn't based on time blocks. It's not something that automatically changes after a certain number of years. A generation is a group of people that form a kinship through shared events that change the society they grew up in. So these events are usually a combination of social, economic, political, technology disruptions. For those people in their formative years, these changes set the stage for a common set of attitudes and expectations for life. mean, there are always nuances within this, but it does provide a common base created through these shared experiences that binds them for life. And Gen Z has experienced more change in their brief years than most generations see in a lifetime. I mean, consider this with me. The oldest of them was 2 when the Columbine massacre happened. So for them, school's never been a safe haven. There's all the discussion now about masks in school and keeping our kids safe, which is all really important. But I think people fail to understand is for this group of people, this generation, it really has never been safe. It's always been this place of metal detectors and lockdown drills. And they had just started kindergarten on 9/11. So war and the threat of terrorism is their norm. And they hadn't even gotten out of grade school before they were hit with the Great Recession and the highest unemployment since the Great Depression. So skip forward through all of this and the other changes, and now they're experiencing the global pandemic, this black swan event unknown to the past 4 generations. So not only did Gen Z see this abundant change, they had to digest it faster and more completely than past generations. And that's because of this, the iPhone and growing bandwidth launched before the youngest of them was even born. So unlike millennials, whose parents could monitor and filter the day's events before it reached their kids, turning off the TV or unplugging the computer that was still in the family room where you could monitor the kids' activities on the computer and their internet activity. Gen Z has always had a front row seat to the turbulence that's become the new norm for us all. But this also has provided Gen Z with instant access to a world of information and an ability to learn at a rate that was absolutely inconceivable to past generations. So why should you care about any of this? Why should understanding this young generation, which many of you may be part of, why should this matter? Well, Gen Z and those that follow comprise 40% of the world's population already. So if not already your target consumer, they will soon be. But more importantly than this, the youth within our societies have always been the drivers of change. So whether it's music, fashion, the adoption of new technology, it's always been the youth that have propelled us forward and taught us all to dream big. In that regard, Gen Z is not any different than past generations. But where they are different is in their ability to connect instantly and disseminate information globally, influencing us all at a faster and faster rate. Trends that previously took months to hit the mainstream now happen in a matter of minutes. Local problems become global issues. Gen Z really is taking the world viral. And many older generations point to technology as the source of this rapid change. The ironic thing is Gen Z doesn't even find technology innovative because there was never a time it wasn't intuitively ingrained into all aspects of their life. I mean, they aren't even conscious that they're using technology like other generations are. It enables their relationships, their learning, their play. For them, it's what electricity was for boomers and Gen X. It's what Wi-Fi was for millennials. But for Gen Z, easy, seamless, transparent technology is just a baseline expectation. And it's companies like these that are setting their expectations, constantly looking at how they can deliver on consumers' ever-changing expectations, adding ease factors on a daily basis. So the specific category is irrelevant. Across industries, companies like these around the globe are recognizing the rise of Gen Z and adjusting to their expectations for immediacy and intuitiveness, allowing consumers to personalize and even individualize what the relationship is that they have with their business. So this intuitive inclination to easy, instantaneous access is changing how the world will work. And actually, probably is already changing how the world currently works. If there's a word that perhaps best captures the impact of Gen Z is having on our society, it's acceleration. So successful retailers are embracing this change and implementing tools, technologies, policies, testing concepts that help them respond faster, working toward improving consumers' instant access to all their needs, human or otherwise, 24/7. So the reason so many industries have been paralyzed by the great digital acceleration brought on by the pandemic is because too many of them are taking a linear path or a one and done approach when it comes to technology and consumer initiatives. Or they're innovating by giving consumers what they're missing today rather than focusing on what they're going to want tomorrow. Doing so really is a recipe for disaster. Gen Z adopts technology faster than we do. So a real life equivalent. When a parent gives their child a phone for the first time, they plug it in, they turn it on, they show them how to use it with the 10 preloaded apps that are on there, check it 6 months later, maybe even 3 months later, and there are 37 new apps downloaded, none of which you've ever heard of. Now this parent is panicked. They're frantically searching, looking for apps in the middle of the night to try and figure out how to stay on top of things. It's overwhelming because you're always behind. Gen Z is a constantly moving target, but they can act as a beacon, helping us understand what all others will come to expect. Understanding them and delivering against their ever-changing needs is critical to the success of us all. So where do we start? What is it about this next generation is driving and accelerating the pace of change?
Thanks, Marcie. And little known fact, I was the parent who was up in the middle of the night researching apps to make sure I hadn't just ruined my child's life. As a parent, we can never keep up. So what we're learning about Gen Z is that they are quite authentic in every piece of their being. So we're going to look at a few overarching themes that we've identified around Gen Z and how consumers that are coming one at a time, starting with authentic. Prepare for an era of radical transparency. After an age of fake news, exaggerated and posed filtered photos, millennials invented the selfie, right? Projecting this perfect life, Gen Z is just over it. They want real and they want it now. Authenticity actually ranks as Gen Z's most important value. It literally came in as #1. This ranked ahead of things like spending time on things that will help with their future, independence, changing the world, and even being rich or famous. They feel it's difficult to accomplish anything else if they're not first true to themselves. Gen Z, in a word, basically has the ability to see through the BS that we've put up with for a very long time. They embrace quirks, flaws, imperfection, and they expect nothing less than transparency and authenticity in every interaction. Once taboo topics like body image, gender, race, mental health, these are front and center with today's youth. Things that once seemed alternative, eccentric, or fringe now are part of our new standards and showing up in policies, communication, and marketing. For them, gender and sexuality is a part of their identity, and it's both subjective and fluid. In fact, only 48% of Gen Z consider themselves completely heterosexual. Yes, that means the majority of them do not. What's most interesting, though, is the degree to which Gen Z is willing to talk openly about gender and sexuality, mental health, you name it, to express who they are, how they feel, and what they believe. But Gen Z is not only more open, but more inclusive too. It's no longer just about them. They want everyone to be treated fairly, no matter who they are. You can see this by looking at what stresses out Gen Z. Not surprisingly, paying for school or getting a good job do rank high for them, but not as high as worrying about others being treated badly for who they are. These worries have all increased since the pandemic began, but what's increased the most is worrying about how others are treated. And this perhaps is the most important thing to understand about Gen Z, is that they worry about everyone being empowered to be their authentic selves. They embrace genuine over perfection. They will expect honest and real, not picture perfect or fake. We're seeing this in trends such as skincare going up and makeup going down for showing your authentic face rather than a made up look. Gen Z sees a done up look as camouflage, hiding the real you, the real person inside. We also see this preference for authenticity come through in other ways. For example, 82% of Gen Z prefer advertisements with real people in real situations. They're looking for authenticity in advertising and everything brands they interact with do or say. And for Gen Z, real people really means real people. They don't want actors who are paid to look like customers. They want to hear the truth from truth tellers. Because of this, the line between creator and consumer is starting to diminish for this generation. Just take a look at everything happening on TikTok. It's a cohort of young creators speaking each other's language to each other. This is how they consume new products, how they consume new content. Nearly 80% say that user-generated content highly impacts their purchasing decisions. They want to connect with your brand and others who love it, not just buy your product. Some are calling it the indorkable nature of Gen Z, referencing their preference for awkward, personality-driven, and unedited content. Things that are too polished, they don't trust. So we're likely to see an accelerated adoption of live streaming, nano influencers, and consumer creators versus those polished brand campaigns we are typically accustomed to. They will align with retailers that are inclusive in their outreach, representation, and advertising, that respect humanity and the environment, and that stand for what they state. Remember, more authenticity means a more diverse expression of who they are. Retail has leaned into personalization, but more intentional action toward individualization will need to become the norm. Why does this brand matter to me? Marcie?
Thanks, Allison. So the next generation carries the weight of the world on their shoulders. You know, they have full access to the world at a much younger age and than any prior generation. And this has resulted in a cohort that has rational decision making, who will do everything in their power to prepare for a better tomorrow. So they've had to grow up fast. They're sensible planners and matter of fact about this world around them and everything happening in it. And they don't necessarily agree with the state of the world that's been left to them. And they're focused on creating a better future. So they're independent, they're future focused, and they're out to enact change for themselves and for those in it. So this generation that grew up with constant headlines of economic insecurity, they're worried about not having enough money. And this has made them more financially conservative. As a generation, we're seeing them grow up and increasingly become savers. And the pandemic has only intensified this. Almost 30% have lost either their job or has had their family lose their job because of COVID. But despite this, making money has decreased as a value following the pandemic. Instead, their values center around personal fulfillment versus fame or wealth. So this is showing up in how they spend their time and how they seek status. So boomers, and to a degree Gen X, focused on acquiring things. And what we saw with millennials is the beginning of this transition to experiences, always looking for ways to do the next thing that can make them feel fulfilled or make them feel connected, and to show others what they're up to. With Gen Z, we're continuing to see this reverse trend of consumerism, buying less, reducing waste wherever they can, and focusing on experiences instead. But theirs are taking a different shape. So from millennials, we're looking for excitement or joy or maybe escape. With Gen Z, what we're seeing is them taking on activities that are going to get them ahead in life. They're going to help them fulfill personal obligation that they feel to help fix the world's problems. And now we're looking at next, the generation which has not yet been named, although there's a lot of names being thrown out around there. This next generation, they're living much of their life in the metaverse. And I know this is scary. As we start to research this, and Allison and I both have young children or have children, mine not so young anymore, but looking at what they're doing and how they're living their lives. And while we're questioning hybrid versus, virtual versus in person, the next generation is already moving on to the metaverse. So for today's youth, their identity is really deeply intertwined with the digital world. It's not just buying skins from Fortnite. We're really seeing them the emergence of virtual worlds where they can buy a Gucci purse for a higher dollar amount than you might buy a real physical purse at retail, and where you can purchase and experience access to live immersive music, arts performances. This is the new layer of consumer experience. that we barely scratched the surface of, but is already becoming, coming on fast and going to be critically important. So this isn't to say Gen Z and Next won't also enjoy real life experiences, but they'll add this layer that will equate to the new possibilities for businesses in the future. So chasing fulfillment will be a priority for Gen Z, including choosing career paths. So Gen Z wants to make a difference in the world. Even more than that, they want to enjoy their work. And these numbers have only increased since the pandemic. What will success mean to a generation like this in the future? Unfortunately, this driven mindset to getting to next doesn't come without a price. So in our pre-pandemic study of Gen Z, mental health was already a big concern, with nearly a third claiming that they felt very or extremely worried most of the time. But in our follow-up study, which we did in May of 2021, that number climbed to 42%. And we saw increases in worry, stress, anxiety across the board in this generation. So the proportion of mental health related ER visits for children, even 12 to 17 over the past year has increased 31%. So we're quickly reaching what is a crisis level. You know, there's a lot of people that still refer to them, youth today, as not being able to handle things or snowflakes. This isn't that. This is a crisis level, and Gen Z's anxiety has gone up 15% in the past 2 years. And COVID is not the only cause of this anxiety. How Gen Z handles stress is different than what we've seen in prior generations. Gen Z is much more self-aware than previous generations. They're eradicating the generation's old stigma around mental health, and instead they're seeking help. They're living out loud with their mental anxieties. And we've seen these pre-COVID numbers continue to go up as it comes to seeking help. In 2021, the American Psychological Association found that Gen Z was nearly 4 times more likely as older adults to say they needed more emotional support than they received since the beginning of the pandemic. So they will look for ways to improve their anxieties, aligning with brands that support their holistic wellness, both mental and physical. And they're already recognizing and removing toxic habits from their lives. And speaking of toxic habits, what would it be without some discussion of social? So as the digital generation, Gen Z has nuanced views towards social media. You know, they recognize some of the harm that it's caused to their generation, toxic body image standards, cyberbullying, negative influences at too young age, while also recognizing it is ingrained in their daily life. Their digital identity is part of their overall identity, but they recognize that this also has its challenges and has its detriment. But unlike millennials who invented the selfie and use social media for projection and bragging rights, what we're seeing in Gen Z is increasingly using social media as a communication tool, and not always a public, and quite often not a public communication tool. About 2/3 of Gen Z say their relationship with friends actually became stronger over COVID, largely because of this digital element and being able to remain connected digitally. So thanks to their digitally connected lifestyle, this generation consumes all the turmoil of the planet all at once. They live in a constant state of overwhelm. They are admittedly high stress, anxiety-ridden, and untrusting of the world around them, but they talk about it. They seek help. They don't just say that's what it is and go on. They want to address it. And companies who understand this will recognize the need for Gen Z to find holistic outlets for mind and body in all aspects of their lives. So how and where they live and work, what they eat, where and how they buy it, will all be increasingly more and more intentional choices based on how it makes them feel. And how a brand has acted in the past and how they're actively working to change for the future, these are things that will increasingly become important to retail in the future going forward. Allison?
I'm here, having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm here. I'm going to leave my video off to try to avoid freezing up on you guys this time. Thanks, Marcie. Now we've come to our third theme here, activists. Now, in case you haven't figured out so far, The future is not going to be a quiet one with this generation at the helm. Obviously, some are more politically active than others, but Gen Z as a whole has found their voice on the stage of mainstream society. While Gen Z remains politically diverse, they are united in what they see as the issues of our time. This generation wants to make changes for their families, their friends, and communities, not just today, but for generations to come. Racism, the Black Lives Matter movement sparked a fire in Gen Z, and they want to be allies in the face of racial and all social injustice. Climate change, 81% believe this to be a medium or large problem and are rallying behind it now and into the future. School shootings have become a personal call to action, and they are stepping into the light to try to solve one of the great issues of our time. And drug abuse and addiction, 50% reported that at least one person they know is addicted or has a problem with drugs or alcohol. And they're not only bystanders as well. In 2020 alone, we saw more than a third of this generation participated in a political rally or protest, or even signed a petition for a cause they agree with or believe in. That's a 9% increase from when we asked them just before the pandemic. So they took this time to really find their voice and come into their own. And they're now beginning to put their money where their mouth is, taking action to support the causes that they believe in. In their shopping habits, we're seeing they're putting sustainability first, over and above older generations. They're doing their research on brands and companies to make sure they align with their values. In fact, 57% think it's important to buy from brands that protect and preserve the environment. The ideology is bleeding into their purchases as well. And 7% of Gen Z also reported having someone buy for them at least one used or since March of 2020. The secondhand clothing market is projected to be a $20 billion business by 2022 and growing 24 times faster than traditional retail, much of that driven by Gen Z. So Gen Z thinks about how to live their values, even when it comes to daily buying decisions. What does this mean for retail today? While we're implementing plans to become more inclusive and lessen the impact you have on the environment, brands can set themselves apart today by finding ways to help the consumer live more sustainable, fair, and inclusive lives. There's industries springing up now around repair, recycling, and re-commerce that are demonstrating that being sustainable doesn't necessarily have to cost the consumer more money. Consumers are demanding these tools. They want platforms, they want ongoing services that align to their values and facilitate their mission to reduce their own environmental impact and improve social outcomes. So showing your consumers that you are a sustainably oriented company through traditional ESG reporting, we're past table stakes there. The next wave of winning retail will not just demonstrate the sustainability of their own operations, but you'll help make it easier and more cost efficient for consumers to live the sustainable life they're seeking.
So tomorrow's consumers are going to simply expect that companies are working to create a better world. They expect brands to have a sense of purpose and a broader commitment to social issues. And they will judge companies not on what they say, but on what they do. And these will drive Gen Z and consumer decisions about where they buy and who they work for and who they're willing to work with. So what does this mean for you? Well, retailers must go beyond talking about what they believe in and talk transparently about what their commitments and their journeys to achieve them are. They must lean in on the Gen Z who are working within their ranks and use your inherent expertise to create a new path for tomorrow. So admitting to currently falling short is okay, as long as we back it up by a clear plan for how to improve in the future. But there is a catch with Gen Z. It would be a mistake to lump them all into one bucket. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's of course nuances within generations, and we can't make the same mistake with Gen Z that we did with millennials, viewing them as all the same, because looking at Gen Z as a whole is not enough to succeed, especially given the complexities and the rapid change expected of retailers today. And they are the most diverse generation in history, demographically, but also in their attitudes, their values, their priorities. They are a reflection of the broader society that we all sense. So, like all generations, Gen Z isn't a monolith. To really understand this generation, you have to break them down into segments. So at EY, based on our research, we've identified 5 segments, groups that share a common outlook. So first is the stress driver. So stress drivers driven to succeed, driven forward, and driven by fear. It's fear of not being good enough. And they became even more stressed during the pandemic. Authentic activists who are motivated by an obligation to save the world. And they're also driven by fear, but they're driven by a fear of what will happen if they don't do it. The secluded perfectionists who are focused on loving what they do and being the best, not for the money and not for the accolades, but for the pure love of what they do. Then there's the big dreamers. They expect to do well and make money, but they aren't necessarily willing to put in the effort. So they're high on dreams, but a little bit low on motivation. And then we have the carefree constituents. They're kind of this definition of go with the flow. And while they may not seem to drive change, they're going to be the ones to quickly adopt it and bring it into the mainstream. So these first 3 groups represent more than 3/4 of the Gen Z population. The big dreamers are still a fairly sizable group. Where there's far fewer carefree constituents. And over the past year and a half, we've seen this carefree constituent group decrease radically as we've seen an increase in authentic activists as it became the right thing to do to stand up and talk against the causes that you believe in. We also saw an increase in secluded perfectionists as many of them were allowed to work in more seclusion, to be alone, and they found that they could thrive in this process. So understanding these segments helped better understand this generation as a whole and what it means to your business. So we need to be careful when we're making sweeping generalizations about this or any other generation. So have no doubt that Gen Z is bringing on a retail revolution. COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped the way we live, work, and do business. But for Gen Z, for many of them, the changes we've seen accelerate during this pandemic are nothing new. I mean, digitalization, sustainability, equality, inclusiveness have long been on the radar, both individually and collectively. And guess what? While the rest of us were fighting to keep up and catch up over the last 19 months, Gen Z leapt forward again. Allison?
The good news is that they believe in creating a better, fairer, and greener future for us all. They're going to hold themselves, society, and businesses accountable for when it comes to building it too. This diverse generation of activists, pragmatists, thinkers, and dreamers will redefine how we come to market as retailers and brands now and into the future. If you're not already thinking about how sustainability fits into your supply chain, how you're individualizing your marketing and exploring new channels, or how you're weaving in the diverse ideologies of this eclectic bunch of societal influencers, you are already well behind. They're likely already doing it for you. Try to keep up.
So before we wrap up, I want to go to Jen and see if we've had any questions come in. Or if you have any questions, throw them out there now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I would love to ask a question. And first of all, that was an extraordinary presentation and it has my brain going, both thinking about what we do inside of academia as we're recruiting students and building educational programs, but also what's happening in the world of retail. And I'm wondering how EY sees organizations sort of threading the needle right now while we're in this moment of transition between what Gen Z wants and what the next generation wants and what Boomers and Gen X seem to want. Like where in thinking about sustainability, for example, can a retail organization meet all those consumers where they're at?
Yeah, no, great question. So the way that we think about it is there are, of course, our target customers, the target consumers, understanding specific needs they may have. So for instance, a boomer may have different product desires, or different hours that they want to be able to shop, or any of these types of things. But from an ease, simplicity, sustainability standpoint, what we found is that if we design against the needs of Gen Z, against this youngest consumer group, it's going to thrill and delight the older generations. It's not at the exception of them. It's, as a Gen Xer, I don't know to have the same expectations of a Gen Z. So when, like we had some freezing in this, or when we can't get our password to work on our computer, or these types of things, what's the first thing we think? What am I doing wrong? What do I need to fix? What do I need to close on my computer to make it work? Gen Z doesn't go there. Their immediate response is, why is this thing not working? What's wrong with it? So they all get the saying, don't blame the user, blame the design, right? So they know it's the design that has the problem. So we want to design solutions, whether it's the ease, simplicity, technology, individualization, any of these things. If we do it against Gen Z's very high expectations, we can do it against all. And then the other aspect of that is like with sustainability. One of the things that we've been doing since April of 2020 is a monthly tracker called the Future Consumer Index. We do this globally to understand how attitudes and behaviors and values are changing over the pandemic. And we're tracking not just how they buy or where they want to buy, or if they're going in stores and these types of things. We're tracking attitudes towards sustainability, toward types of foods they're buying, the health orientation, ideas around organic or plant-based. So understanding where their values and attitudes are and how that ties to what their behaviors are. And around sustainability, one of the really interesting things we saw since the beginning is an increasing importance put on sustainability across all age groups. And this is happening globally. So Gen Z definitely has the highest of expectations, followed by millennials, and the highest importance around sustainability. But we've seen Gen X and baby boomers prioritize and importance on sustainability also continue to increase during it. And where I think this is really important is, having done this research with generations for a long time and studying millennials through the last, Great Recession, they turned against or weren't as willing to buy organic or sustainable because of the higher price points. And that's very typical in a recession. Those types of things go lower in priority. And what we saw in this, and definitely in the early stages, we thought it was recession category and what we were going into, they continued to be willing to buy more, pay more, and prioritize those types of things.
Yeah, and I think transparency really comes to light now. The millennials really push transparency in terms of business ethics and ethical sourcing. And we want to know where the product's coming from, how much you paid for it, how much I'm paying for it. That was really largely driven by the older sect. Well, now Gen Z absolutely demands it. They are largely untrusting of institutions and the corporate America that they have been handed, and they want to change it. And they will ask more of the businesses and companies that they buy from in order to ensure that they are making ethical purchases, sustainable buying decisions. And it's going to impact, if not already is, impact every brand and retailer that's marketing to this young generation. And as Marcie said, myself as a Gen Xer, I'm not going to disagree. I wish we had done it. I wish we had done it sooner. They're just acting on what we wanted to be. Our aspirations are now becoming their expectations, if that makes sense. So every generation will be impacted by their ability to move companies to a higher level of expectation.
Yeah, I feel that. So here's a question that's coming in. How do you feel about, or what does your research show about the relationship of fast fashion brands like Shine or wearing the latest, greatest for social media exposure? How does this connect with Gen Z's expectations of sustainability and eco-consciousness?
Yeah, great question. So I think this is a really interesting one, and one where we have to continue to watch to see if they put their money or don't put their money where their mouth is, because we see sustainability and the concerns about the manufacturing process and clothing and everything that goes into it, right? That continues to increase. So while we see the importance of that, the concerns around that continue to go up in our data, we see the actual behaviors come out in a couple different ways. One way is around the growth of well, I say the goodwill industry, but around secondhand or pre-owned. I mean, it has absolutely exploded, and it's happening on a global basis. It's just as big in China as it is in the US, and we can expect this to increase. And I think that that's happening both from an environmental standpoint, but also from a price. And I think it's also become a cool factor now to get a good deal and to show that you care about the environment. At the same time, we've seen brands that are completely based on fast fashion continue to increase and be among their favorite. So I think that this is something we're going to have to continue to watch play out and see, if there's one side that wins more than the other, but then also recognize, just as we showed the 5 different attitudinal segments, that's going to play out in what they're buying. There's going to be groups that are actually, stick to not buying the fast fashion or going into that. And there's going to be others that kind of go middle of the road. So that's where understanding your consumer, who you're targeting, what's a priority to them is important, but also understanding, even if they say or even if they're willing to buy the stuff, it still may not be cool factor enough that it could hurt you in the marketing and PR department.
Makes sense. I have one more question, I think, and that is, I'm wondering what Gen Z thinks about, or what their interest is in the metaverse, or if that really is something you're seeing sprouting up with the generation next, and how those pieces might come together.
I'm letting Allison take this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. I have 2 young daughters who, for Halloween this year, the younger one is going as a Minecraft character that she loves to play. And my 10-year-old is going as her favorite Vocaloid artist. I don't know if you're familiar with Vocaloid, but this is a music genre where all of the singers are avatars. And I can't pronounce the name of the character that she's going as, but basically my in real life children are dressing up as their virtual life celebrities and stars. They're famous people. They're completely intertwining their digital and in-person realities together. And this is where we are headed. Now, granted, they are a bit younger than Gen Z. They're 7 and 10. So to be determined on whether they're going to follow the same values as Gen Z or break off into 3 mini micro generations, following the 13 and unders that are happening now. But it's real and it's happening. There are entire virtual communities and virtual worlds that are popping up of like-minded individuals, and people are spending real dollars on those virtual worlds. I have been asked for birthday presents, for Christmas presents already. I need a new skin. I need a new hairstyle. I need to add some boots to this character. They are chatting with people in all parts of the world, which I am monitoring to a degree as much as I can. It's terrifying, as Marcie said earlier, the integration of virtual with reality, but it is completely normal to them. So what's to say that the metaverse in the future isn't having a job in the metaverse, going to school in the metaverse, living more than part of your life in this digital world? I don't see it as a stretch of reality, considering how much I see it playing out now with my 7 and 10-year-old. So as consumer experts, as we're supposed to be in this room today, everyone on the call as well, we have to be paying attention to it, because every brand will need to pay attention to it to understand how and where they will have to fit into this world that's being created in front of us.
And I think that also just highlights the gap between the generations. And because when we look at what's happening with discussions around workforce and workplace and where we shop, people who think they're advanced are talking about virtual versus physical and hybrid. You don't even hear metaverse come into it. The next generation, this generation, that's going to be normal. And the idea that they physically have to do something will be very confusing to them. So that's where I think this type of insights and the things that we shared today, we hope gives this group some ammunition, but also helps them realize the power they have and the knowledge they're gaining as people that are probably closer to understanding the metaverse in this world than a lot of the people who are leading retail today. So bringing them the insights and helping them understand how to navigate through that is really going to be both beneficial for their careers, but also critical to the success of retail.
I love it. That is a perfect place for me to pass this back over to you two for a little wrap up.
Perfect.
Yeah, no problem. Let me advance to this next slide here. We just love to end on a note that will resonate and maybe stick with you in the future. When most businesses and retailers think about designing for the youth today, they're still thinking of youth within the millennial context, as I said earlier. Exhibit A, as you see here, from a movie I'm sure we've all seen at this point. This is the youth of America that most retailers, I think, are still designing their stores and experiences for. But we've moved from here, come on technology, to here. From picture perfect to being your authentic self, from a narrow definition of beauty to a broad celebration of beauty, to brands not only focus on representation, but to racial justice. This is a shift to Gen Z values.
So with this, don't design based on past assumptions. Don't create based on what we've always known, or designing for tomorrow's consumer will mean you really do have to carve out new paths and attempt new things. It really will be more exploratory than explanatory. So be bold. And with that, we thank you.
Thank you so much. Folks, before you drop off, if today's talk resonated with you and you want to learn more about how you can be one of the leaders who shape the future of retail, standing on insights like this, you can check out CCAD's Master of Professional Studies in Retail Design. I've dropped the link there into the chat. This is a first of its kind program, which is enrolling now with its first cohort in January 2022. It was shaped by leaders who are part of the industry today. If you enjoyed today's lecture, you want to share it with a friend who wasn't able to attend, there will be a recording on that website in the coming days. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for this really exciting presentation. I appreciate it.